talks about a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood. If there really was a worldwide flood, what would the evidence be? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. Well, there really was a worldwide flood. Just look at the stony curse.
Welcome to Creation Foundation, where we discuss the biblical worldview and the reasons why it is the only worldview that makes sense with the evidence available out here in the real world. I'm Dick Temple.
I'm Mark Finkbeiner.
And I'm Greg Morgan.
Today we're going to talk about irreducible complexity, a term made popular by Michael Denton, who teaches at a university in New Zealand. What Michael Denton did was study biology to the extent that he realized biological systems are so complex, there is no way that they could arise on their own. All the various component parts that have to go into it to make a biological system could not arise simultaneously, even if the conditions were right and the methods were available to cause them to come together. He used a demonstration of a mousetrap which has 5 parts. And these 5 parts are all necessary at one time. They have to be put together by a designer, and the mousetrap will not work unless all parts are there. Well, the mousetrap is extremely simple compared to any biological system. Nevertheless, try to figure out how a mousetrap could evolve with only 5 parts having to come together, even if you put it into your imaginary biological system to try to get 5 parts to come together at one time. It's an impossibility. But let's look at the complexity of the biological systems and the laws that relate to them. Mark, what do you like to share with us today?
The Bombardier Beetle, and then I want to talk also about something that you might not think of, but I want to talk about electromagnetism, stuff like that. But first, I just want to mention in Psalms 139, verse 14, it says, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, that my soul knoweth right well." And David, he uttered those words, and it is amazing how when you do read the Bible, it appears that the Bible has been ahead of science for a long time, because how could he know that before the invention of the microscope, before modern technology and all of that? And Greg and Dick here, they've been telling us from the last episode and then some in this episode just how complex our biological systems are, the complexity of living things. And I just want to take you back to the first law of thermodynamics, which I talked about the last episode. And I want to kind of do a refresher on that one, because this is really important, because the first law of thermodynamics, it is a law. It is a law of nature that proves beyond reasonable doubt that evolution cannot happen and there had to be a creator. Okay? Because whatever creation you see, something had to be greater than the creation in order for it to get here. That is basically what the first law of thermodynamics is telling us, because it says nothing can be created or destroyed. Okay, so you go back to the periodic table of elements that I discussed in the last episode. Okay, and the elements is what makes up all the living things and everything that we see. It makes up all the matter. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't make up information, okay? And so you have to discuss, well, where did that information come from? Okay, if it is not matter, well, it had to be created by something that is greater than itself. And all things had to be created by something that is greater than itself.
Well, let me interrupt just a second, Mark.
Okay.
I'm trying to get everything organized in my mind clearly. The first law of thermodynamics relates to what exists right now, observable. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And basically it says that matter and energy are interchangeable and are neither created nor destroyed. Is that what we're...
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so that's what we see today. Mm-hmm. We can't create or destroy energy today in today's system, yet what you're saying is evolution tells us that something has to be created. Is that
right?
what you're getting at?
That's right. Something has to be created. But evolution is saying that we started out with something very simple, and from that very simple thing, over time, over millions of years, things have become more complex. Energy has become more complex. Information has become more complex, and that violates several laws of science. That violates the first law that says nothing can be created or destroyed, okay? So in other words, you can't get more out of something than what you put into it.
Okay, that's your first law.
Yeah,
okay.
and a lightning bolt can't create anything. It will only destroy the soup scum that's in the pond that the evolutionists talk about.
Okay, but now you threw something else in here that is separate from the first law of thermodynamics. You started mentioning information.
Yes.
Information, as you explained to us last time, is something that is non-tangible.
Correct.
The first law of thermodynamics deals with things that are tangible. Information deals with non-tangible something that affects the tangible.
Correct.
Am I up
very
with you?
good. That's very good. That's right. So you have to have information to create something that's tangible, to create matter, but you got to have energy, okay? You got to have energy, and the energy to create matter, but you have to have information to create the energy, and energy to create the information. You know, you got to have all three, but yet information is non-tangible, okay? So evolution has no answer whatsoever for how did that information get there to create everything. And you see, this is where we go back again to the periodic table of elements. We've been able to synthesize other elements, you know, like from uranium to plutonium, and now we find out that plutonium, there might be a little bit of that in uranium. And but the point is that no human being has ever observed, nor has any human being ever created something out of nothing. The first law says you can't create something from nothing. You can't start out with nothing and then get something. Okay? That's what it's saying. And there's other laws that say it in just a different way. For example, I wasn't going to get into this just right now, but the other one is Newton's third law. For every action, there is an opposite and equal reaction. That goes right along with the first law of thermodynamics, okay? For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. In other words, you can't get more out of a reaction than what you put into it, okay? So it's like those phony baloney TV shows, you see, where some guy's holding a shotgun and he shoots somebody else, and the guy that gets shot, he gets blown against the wall. Now, if he gets blown against the wall, and I'm shooting the shotgun, then I should be getting blown against the wall. Okay? So, see, you can't get more out of what you put into it. Now, the interesting thing is, here's where the second law comes in. The second law says that everything goes from order to disorder. All right? It goes from order to disorder, so in time, you lose information. You lose energy. Now, the first law says it can't be created or destroyed, and it's not being destroyed, it's just that it's being lost. It's going out there. It'd be like if you took some wood and burnt it up, okay? You burn up the wood, you're not destroying the atoms that make up the wood. The wood goes up into steam and carbon, soot, and smoke. So all you have done is you have altered the material called wood. You have altered it. It has changed its material structure, but yet it has not been destroyed. But the information is deteriorating. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to those who are watching. But the point is, the second law comes along and it says, but things become more random and disorganized in time, not more complex. Okay.
Okay, now let me throw some Bible in here. I'm beginning to kind of get with you here, Mark.
Yeah.
Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
That's right.
That predicts the first law of thermodynamics.
That's correct. And it's greater than its creation. God is greater than the creation, and that's how he's able to create the elements.
Okay, now for the second law of thermodynamics, if we go to the book of Hebrews, where it tells us that the earth is running down, the universe is running down, it's all going to wear out, we're now into this second law of thermodynamics, both predicted by the Bible, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
The second law, I would say it started when Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden. Before that, everything was perfect. Okay, then after that, our biological systems begin to run down. Okay, now there's that one biological law. The white blood cells have to be continually replaced, right?
Well, they keep dying. I mean,
yeah, and then they have to be replaced, but eventually they slow down. And once those white blood cells, once they quit replacing the dying blood cells, you die. That's when you get cancer. So this goes along again now with Lenz Law. All right, Lenz Law goes along with these two coil guns that I made here. Okay, Lenz Law goes along with Newton's third law, goes along with the first law of thermodynamics, that you cannot get more out of something than what you put into it. Okay, so but Lenz Law is really interesting when it comes to electronics, when it comes to electromagnetic induction, because Lenz Law says this. It says that a current that goes through a wire produces a magnetic field, but there's a magnetic field that produces the current. And so you have these two magnetic fields and they oppose each other. And it is a good thing that they do. Now, this is according to mainline physicists, not according to me, but according to them. If you did not have these two magnetic fields opposing each other, that is demonstrated with these coil guns here, there would be a runaway energy effect. The energy would just go out of control and the whole universe would blow up. And so you've got to have both, okay, again. And I just think that's really interesting in the matter of electronics. But you have to have this repelling action. Here we have a coil gun, and this demonstrates Lenz Law. This demonstrates that for every action, there is an opposite and equal reaction, and you can't get more out of something than what you put into it, which is a law that shows that evolution can't even work, okay? So anyway, when I put this ring on here like this, okay, now this is an aluminum ring. It is non-magnetic. Technical term is non-ferrous, okay? So it is not magnetic. But when I energize the coil gun and I hit this button right here, which we can't do in the studio because the ring would go through the ceiling, but when I energize it like this, I push that button, electricity flows through hundreds and hundreds of turns of magnetic wire here. Well, that magnetic wire is producing an electromagnetic reaction, and that electromagnetism, it actually causes the aluminum ring to become magnetic, okay? So there is not only a current that goes through the wires, there is a current now that goes through the aluminum ring, okay? And so the two electromagnetic occurrences, they repel each other, okay? So there's an electromagnetism that goes through here, and magnetism, it goes through the ring, and they repel each other, and it would be like taking two magnets of the same polarity, and they repel each other, okay? So that is what causes this ring to shoot very fast and go through the roof, okay? Now it's a good thing that there is that repulsion, because if there was not a repulsion in Lenz Law, in theory, the universe would blow up. Okay, I just think that's really interesting, and that goes along with the first law of thermodynamics, Lenz's law, and Newton's third law. Okay, now last is the Bombardier Beetle. The Bombardier Beetle is a little insect that is found in Florida and down in South America. And the Bombardier Beetle, you can see him here on the screen. He's a little bug about 1/2 inch long, and he blows out hot liquid out his rear end to defend himself. And this hot liquid is about 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, well, there's something really interesting about this Bombardier Beetle and Irreducible Complexity, because this little Bombardier Beetle, in his rear end, he has 4 chambers, at least 4. There is 2 chambers, one chamber for a chemical called hydrogen peroxide, and then another chamber for another chemical, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but it's called hydroquinone. All right, so this little beetle, he has to mix these two chemicals together, and when he mixes it together, he has to add an inhibitor to keep the two chemicals from exploding. Then when he wants to shoot this chemical, when he's in danger, then he has to add another chemical called an anti-inhibitor, and then when he does that, he shoots the chemical out his rear end and he can defend himself. Well, now can you imagine this little beetle evolving over millions of years? Out there somewhere in some secret area, I know I can just imagine this, he's out there in his testing grounds, in his evolutionary testing grounds, and out there in the jungle somewhere, you hear a little beetle go boom, and you hear another one go boom, and Herman, he says, well, that's Fred, he didn't mix his chemicals right, he blew off his rear end. You see, so the point is that all those chemicals, they all have to be there at the same time, and the inhibitor has to be there, the anti-inhibitor. You can't have one without the other, otherwise you're going to have all these little beetles blowing their rear ends off, okay? And so, anyway, with that thought in mind, just remember the first law of thermodynamics says you can't get more out of what you put into it, and so evolution is a violation of the first law of thermodynamics. That's what you need to remember.
Well, I think everybody ought to get a hold of Mark and find out when his science club meets so they can watch that ring go through the roof. Because it's not going to happen here today. He pressed the button, but we made sure he wasn't plugged in. So we turn this over to you, Greg. What would you like to share with us about irreducible complexity?
Well, we've talked some about the irreducible complexity down inside the cells, but there's also irreducible complexity in the behavior of animals. And you can see some really good examples of that in several DVDs that are put out by Exploration Films, and you can find it at exploration.films.com. There's Irreducible Complexity 1, Creatures That Defy Evolution 1, there's Amazing Creatures Which Defy Evolution 2, and Amazing Creatures Which Defy Evolution 3. Now, I really recommend that people get these DVDs. They have some outstanding photography, they've got really good commentary, and they do lay out the case that these creatures could not have evolved. There's just too much complexity in their behavior, and too much of that complexity is contradictory unless all of it is there. One thing will get them killed unless they have all the others there at the same time. Like talk a little bit about one particular little creature. It's called a Bristleside Curlew. Here where we live in the mid-Columbia, we occasionally see curlews, but they're not that same species. The Bristleside Curlew lives in Alaska. It summers there, and that's where it fattens up so that it can migrate. Once it reaches enough body fat, the curlew flies south. Now, that's flying over the Pacific Ocean, the northern Pacific Ocean, which is almost empty of islands, but this bird can't swim. Now, you might think that it would head for the nearest island, but it doesn't. It bypasses even the Hawaiian Islands. It flies to Fiji, south of the equator. I better check to make sure that's true. It flies to Fiji, which is a long, long flight for a small bird. Somehow, that bird has to know how much fat it needs in order to make that flight, and it has to know where Fiji is, because if it's only 1 degree off in its navigation, it's not going to find Fiji. The Fiji Islands are a pretty small island chain and even smaller islands, but it also doesn't store enough fat to get there unless it takes advantage of winds. So it flies around storm systems in the direction that the storm system will help it on its journey. That means it flies actually longer than a straight line distance from Hawaii to Fiji, but the wind makes up for that, and somehow it knows when the wind's going to help it and when it's going to hurt it, and avoids the storm systems that will hurt it and flies with those that will help it. If any of those things are missing, the curlew runs out of fat, exhausted, drops in the ocean, and either a shark gets it or it drowns. How could that possibly evolve? The first curlew that tried to leave Alaska, flying down there, if it didn't have enough fat, it would drown. Therefore, there'd be no descendants to try that experiment again. But if a bird somehow hatched out that had enough genetic information so that it develops enough fat before it heads south, but it doesn't know where Fiji is, well, it might fly as far south as Fiji, but since it doesn't know where Fiji is, it drops in the sea and drowns, and there would be no descendants to make that experiment again. It all has to be there at once, and there are a lot of other features beyond that that have to be there at once for that bird to make it. But I also like to talk a little bit about emperor penguins. Some of you have seen the movie March of the Penguins, which I highly recommend. What they talk about is the evolution of penguins. And then they go into, the story is really about love between penguins. And that's really what the story is about. It's a wonderful love story they show. But let's take a look at the complexity of the penguin. The first shot in the movie shows these penguins coming out of the ocean and rising up like rockets and landing on the ice, and then they head south to get to their breeding grounds. Now, they're going out of the ocean and they are leaping up a 6-foot cliff of ice and landing on the ice. How do they do that? Their brains have to be able to look up at that ice, and their eyes have to be good enough, looking through water into air. They have to be able to tell how high that ice is, and they have to know how fast to swim in order for them to get up there. Now, if they were evolving, you could think that a penguin would try to do that, and it would jump up there, and if it misjudged the height, it would be about 2 feet short and fall back into the ocean. And if it was persistent, it would swim around and try it another time and keep trying. But if it's consistently misjudging the height, eventually it either gets frustrated and leaves, which means it never has chicks because it doesn't get the breeding ground, or it's going to keep doing it until it's so exhausted that it dies. Either way, that's the end of that experiment. But let's say it misjudged it the other way, that it goes too high. Well, it's got pretty small feet, and if it goes up, say, 12 feet and falls on the ice, that's a 6-foot fall, it breaks its legs. And if you watch the rest of the movie, you see pretty quickly, it needs those legs to get to the breeding ground. It walks on them. It also glides, but while gliding, it uses its feet to propel it. So either way, if it underjudges the distance or if it overjudges it, it's going to die. So the ability to judge that distance has to be there for the first emperor penguin and for every emperor penguin since. Once it gets onto the ice, all the penguins head south to their breeding ground. And they go about 60 miles over the ice. 60 miles. Why that far? Well, because this is the beginning of winter, and the ice has already expanded out from the continent, and there's about a 60-mile rim of ice around the continent. If they go out here too far, they're using up energy they don't need to expend. But if they only go out about 20 miles, come spring, when the ice is melting again, the ice will melt before their chicks are ready to swim, and the chicks will die. So they have to do that 60 miles to get there. How do they judge how far to go? That's built into their genetic code. You can argue that they learned it from their parents, but no, they didn't see their parents do that walk. But beyond that, since we're talking about origins of things and irreducible complexity, the first penguin that tried this had to know how far to go. Otherwise, its chicks would have drowned. Once they get there, they do a lot of dances and singing, and they get together and they mate. In that process, the male and the female get to know each other so well that they can recognize each other by their call. Now, their calls sound identical to me, but clearly they sound different to them. They have to have the ability to tell who is who, because as soon as the female lays the egg, she heads back out to the ocean. She then has to come back with food for the chick after she's spent much of the winter fishing. If they don't identify themselves properly when they get back, the various penguins will not adopt abandoned chicks, so her chick will die if she doesn't recognize the male. But the female, after they breed, the female develops a huge egg and lays it, and then she has to get back to the ocean. She had to have had enough fat in her body so that she could get those 60 miles, that she could develop that egg, and then she can get back to the ocean. But since it's winter, the ocean has frozen further out while they were on their mating. She has to go out about 90 miles, and she has to have enough fat to make it there. Another little thing, crucial, as she's laying the egg, she lifts her toes so that there's a little pocket. And the structure, she has just the right structure in her body that she lays the egg right into that little thing. If she didn't do that, the egg would hit the ice, and as little as 15 seconds on the ice, it would freeze enough that the chick would die. And there are hundreds of other things that you'll find. If you watch that film carefully, you'll see that that could not have evolved. And I do recommend you watch this before you watch March of the Penguin. If you've already watched March of the Penguin, get this and then watch March of the Penguin again. You'll see that it is just incredible complexity, and there's no way that all of those behaviors could have evolved. Dick?
We notice that the creator of the universe is extremely complex and in his thinking, and produces such a wonderful variety in what he has designed. It brings me back to the thought of Philip Johnson, who read the book by Dawkins, The Blind Watchmaker, and said, hey, if that's all evolution has for evidence, it just can't happen. And from there on began to study creation. You know, our government today spends billions of dollars, I mean like billions, not millions, billions of dollars on research to try to prove evolution, to try to find some evidence for evolution. The young Earth six-day creationists just love it, because all we do is read the material and methods and gather all the information that goes with it, and again, it backs up just exactly what the Bible says. So the best evidence for creation is the rest of the story.
The Bible talks about a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood. If there really was a worldwide flood, what would the evidence be? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. Well, there really was a worldwide flood. Just look at the stony curse, with billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. The Bible talks about Noah and the ark in a worldwide